Hello, Garland Nixon here, and the neocons Ukraine project is in, shall we say, great jeopardy. Let's talk. Good morning, Garland Nixon here, and we're getting the week started off right. Oh my gosh, big things going on this week. We got Jody Barr coming up tomorrow on Tuesday morning. We got Scott Ritter and Andre Martianov coming up Tuesday evening. So going to be a fun week. A lot of stuff going on. And I think one of the things that we have to start talking about is the Ukraine project's meltdown, right? We talk about Ukraine often, and I do it too. We talk about Ukraine as a country. We talk about the conflict in Ukraine. We talk about the dynamics between the war, between, and I think the big discussion, of course, for obvious reasons, is the dynamics between Russia, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine, and seeing Ukraine as a block, seeing Ukraine as a kind of a wall between the U.S. empire and Russia. That basically, in a nutshell, the U.S. empire is using Ukraine as a tool to take out Russia. But that means something, right? And we use this term, the Ukraine project. Right. I use, and I'm sure you hear it a lot, but let's start with kind of a little bit of a definition. What is the Ukraine project? It's a project for maintaining control of the world. And here's the thing. The U.S. looks at post 1991, like post Soviet Union disintegration, collapse, whatever you want to call it, as a period of time where they were the world's most powerful entity. They were the world's, as they saw, leader. One of the terms that you hear in the United States, is the leader. They'll say the president of the United States is the quote, and Americans know this, leader of the free world, the leader of the free world. There's a lot of implications there. Implication that, number one, the U.S. is a leader and that is a duty that has been thrust upon the U.S. empire, because the U.S. empire, our culture is so superior. Everything about the U.S. is so superior that nature has thrust the leadership role on the United States and therefore on the president of the United States. Well, since nature, the universe, God, however you want to put it, has thrust the leadership role on the United States, and subsequently that would mean the U.S. president, then that means that should stay that way. But there's an inherent flaw in that logic. And here's the flaw. If you're arguing that nature, God, the universe, that some kind of a natural order places the United States at the forefront of leadership for the world, right? We're supposed to be the leaders of the world. Everybody's supposed to follow us. Our culture is superior. Everybody's supposed to, the U.S. culture is superior. Everybody's supposed to follow it, blah, blah, blah. If that is the natural order of things, if you think about it, the U.S. wouldn't have to fight for it, because natural orders kind of maintain themselves pretty well, right? Does anyone have to say to the moon, circle the earth? Does anyone have to say, if you go in a western forest and the apex predator is in that particular forest is a grizzly bear, I guess that would be the apex predator for North America, right? Does anyone have to align that? Does anyone have to say, hey, we got to make sure that grizzly bear keeps his power? No, we don't. Why? Because the nature of an order such as that is that it maintains itself. The fact that the grizzly bear is bigger and stronger and faster and blah, 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 maintains the order. The grizzly bear doesn't have to fight for the order, doesn't have to keep the order. It's a natural order, and natural orders kind of maintain themselves. That's why we call them natural orders. But what we're getting from the neocons, what we're getting from those who pursue U.S. hegemony is that it is a natural order that the United States is at the forefront of leadership for the world. But the U.S. has to fight to maintain that, quote, natural order. The U.S. has to struggle to hold on to that natural order. God forbid that somebody else could come along and move to the top of a natural order. Well, again, a grizzly bear doesn't have to fight for a natural order. He just has to be a grizzly bear. It is the nature of a grizzly bear to kind of, and I use this term reluctantly, rule the forest, but at least to be the most powerful entity, to be the apex predator in the forest. It is the nature of a grizzly bear to do that by being a grizzly bear. I guess that's maybe where the word grizzly comes up. But you see my point? Whereas the U.S. empire's position is we are in charge, we're the lead, but we have to fight, we have to starve people, we have to come up with all kind of plans and machinations to maintain this order, that it's a natural order. I would argue if it is a natural order, all you got to do is get out of the way and allow it to happen. But the problem is this. I know, you know, we all know that it ain't a natural order. In fact, that it's not even an order. That it is a method of a predator maintaining an order where they can prey on anyone they want at will. That's all the neocons want. They want an order where they can prey on whoever they want at will. You know, recently, and this is great. Recently, I had a guy on one of my shows, Andrei Telezhenko. He's a former Ukrainian diplomat, and subsequently he went on the mother of all talk shows. He was good on there, but he had some issues with, same as my show, and with Moats, he had some issues with his connection. What's his name? Over at the Gray Zone, Aaron Mate did an interview with him, and he didn't have any issues with his connections, and it was fantastic. I would recommend everybody to go watch that. It was really, really good. And the thing that you find out about that, the thing, as if we didn't already know, but the thing that you pick up about that is the level of corruption and the institutionalization of corruption. What you find out in listening to Andrei Telezhenko, as if we didn't already know, but what we get out of that, what I got out of that is Biden, Hunter Biden, etc. They went in, of course, they had a plan to utilize Ukraine as a blunt object against Russia. But they also, it is their nature to be pirates, to be criminals. So the Biden team went in, and of course Hunter had to go in and get paid. Lots of other people were going in and getting paid. The Amos Hawks teams of the world, the Kofor Blacks of the world, etc. They're all going in and they're getting paid. They've taken over a country, and there's money there and there's resources there. So they have to go in and they got to steal some of it. And that be it the FBI, the CIA, the intelligence agencies, the State Department, or whatever, all of them were in on it. It wasn't like they had to sneak around behind somebody's back for their corruption. The corruption was inherent to the system. They went in, and it's like, we're going to go and we're going to overthrow this country, right? And the State Department, intelligence communities, they were all down with that. But also baked into the cake for that was, we also know that as we all go in, everybody's going to eat, right? We're going to go in there, and yeah, we're going to do our political thing. We're going to do our military thing, but also our sons and daughters and wives and friends and business associates are going to go in there, and they're going to take advantage of the corruption, and they're going to fill their pockets. So I think that's a great thing to see, because it further helps you to understand the corruption of the U.S. empire. The corruption of an empire, the corruption of imperialism, the inherent corruption of imperialism. It's, hey, man, we got to go in here and get our money while we're maintaining the empire. So they go in there and they do that. The problem with that in this day and age, and again, this is also part of the catastrophic meltdown, the problem with the level of corruption that they pursued in Ukraine is that in this day and age, It's so easy for information to get out. In this day and age, a simple tweet, a simple email, etc., can get out. Um, there are YouTube shows. There is no shortage of alternative media to get all of this stuff out. So they went in there and they did what they do. There's nothing abnormal about the Hunter Biden stuff or any of this stuff. This is normal. They go and they overthrow a country. They steal everything that isn't nailed down right. But now it's going to be harder. Now you've got people staring down their back, and you got Garland Nixon and Aaron Mattei and the mother of all talk shows and Jimmy Dore and everybody else looking for another story about Ukraine, looking for another way to expose the corruption and imperialism and all these things, right? And so now, even I understand what's his name, Tucker Carlson. He supposedly is going to be coming up with some kind of a new alternative media platform. So there's lots going on here, and it makes it more difficult. It makes it difficult to hide this stuff, but so long you can hide it in the early stages, but it's bit by bit starting to come out, and it's making it more difficult. You look right now what's happening with the FBI. They're in really a disastrous mode. You've got some people in Congress who are unhappy with the FBI for whatever reason. And they're bringing the FBI in, they're questioning them, and they'll go after the January 6th stuff, but they won't go after the corruption in Ukraine. They really stand away from that. They're scared to death because to go after the Republicans, let me just say this, Republicans are scared to death to go after the corruption in Ukraine. They'll go after China. They'll say Biden is connected to China. And sure, but here's the bottom line. And this is all very important part of this. Yes, did Biden do corruption in China? The Bidens will do corruptions on the moon if they can get it. So the idea that they were involved with corruption in China as though that's some strange thing that's unique to China is absurd. The Republicans really won't and can't go after the foundation of the Bidens' corruption empire, shall we say, over the last, say, decade, because it is about Ukraine. And it also gets into Hunter Biden. Look, if Hunter Biden's going to Ukraine, if Hunter Biden's getting paid in Ukraine, if Hunter Biden is involved in getting money to which it certainly appears there's evidence, getting money to the, bio research labs in Ukraine, right? He's been tied to those. If Hunter Biden's tied to all that stuff, which he is, then Hunter Biden's tied to intelligence. And not that he is part of the intelligence community, but that the intelligence community certainly understands that, look, we're going to do our thing. This is the vice president. This is the vice president's son. It is our way that whoever the leadership of this empire is, they can go in and get rich off of whatever country we roll. We're going to roll a country. We're going to overthrow a country. And it's the way we do things that the vice president's son, the president's son, the speaker of the house, any of those, many senators that want to get paid and there's money in that country, they can go in there and steal all they want. So they've got to be protected because that's just the way things are done. So the intelligence community is down with that. They worked with Hunter Biden. And of course, here's what's obvious. You know what's funny? When the Hunter Biden laptop, and I'm going to make a claim I haven't heard anybody else make. When the Hunter Biden laptop information came out, and we found out that the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop for a year before they admitted it, and over a year before they actually admitted it, and that the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop, and they knew it was original, and they went to the social media and the mainstream media and said, oh, if something comes out about a laptop with Hunter Biden, it's Russian disinformation. But they had it and they knew it wasn't. The issue, the discussion was they're protecting the president. They're protecting Hunter Biden. That ain't it. They were protecting themselves because Hunter Biden is an integral part of their operation. Because in making sure that Hunter Biden got paid, in making sure that Joe Biden got paid, they always had a little bit of compromise. So they could bring Joe Biden in, Joe Biden, or Joe Biden could be involved in Ukraine. All of this stuff could go on in Ukraine, right? They could do all their dirt in Ukraine. Joe Biden, he gets paid, Hunter eats, and everything else, right? But when it came down to it, they knew this. If 2 years from now, 3 years from now, a year from now, from when they overthrew Ukraine, if the intelligence community said we're to say, hey, look, we've decided we want to step up to the plate here and do this, and Joe Biden said that's a bridge too far, I don't want to do that, this setup was already there, that they could come back to Joe Biden and say, well, it would be most unfortunate if this information about Hunter came out. So yes, did the intelligence community assist with Hunter Biden getting paid? Absolutely. Did they work on protecting Hunter Biden so that nobody would find out about his dirt, or that anybody that talked would get taken out? Absolutely. Did they do it to protect Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? Absolutely not. They did it to protect themselves, because it was all integral. It was part of it. We got Hunter Biden involved. We make sure Hunter Biden gets paid, but we got to make sure nobody knows, that the intelligence community, that we were involved in taking Hunter Biden and getting Hunter Biden paid. So the intelligence community got him paid. They got to make sure that nobody knows his connections to the intelligence community, how they made sure to get him paid, so that they could then have Joe Biden by the short and curlies for the future, in case he decided to act up, in case he decided not to listen anymore. It was all a setup, a circular action to make sure we own Joe Biden. But meanwhile, Joe Biden's getting paid, Hunter Biden's getting paid. What do they care? They ain't in this thing for the long term. Everybody's filling their pockets today. So that was the initial part of Ukraine, is overthrow the country, everybody gets paid. And now, because everybody knows who got paid, people have dirt on other people, they can take other people down, particularly the intelligence community. And I believe it or not, that the Russians have a lot of information that they haven't released, and they probably could, and at some point will. Excuse me, but I think they're waiting. I'll be honest, sorry. I think they're waiting for the opportune time. I don't think the Russians are going to release what they have until after this thing is over. I think the time will come, but I think they're waiting for a number of reasons that I won't get into. But I think they're waiting until after this thing stops. Either they can do it during negotiations, or after it's all said and done, they can do it to post-op, depending on how things work out for them in Ukraine. Because I still believe that ultimately the Russians are going to be in charge of Ukraine. The Ukrainians aren't going to have anywhere else to turn to. And again, remember, you got two Ukraines, but the nation of Ukraine, whatever leadership there will be of Ukraine, will be economically abandoned by the neocons and by the Europeans when they're of no longer value to them. And that day is coming soon. But we're talking about the neocon. Ukraine as a project and its catastrophic meltdown and collapse. We got to go back to the beginning, just very briefly, that this was not supposed to be a long-term war against Russia. Possible, but the plan was short-term. Get this thing started, and everybody, you guys all know this. Get it started. Do the sanctions. Russia's economy collapses. When that didn't happen, the neocons have been improvising ever since that happened. So realistically, the Ukraine project is an improvisation, because what they planned on didn't work. Their plan didn't work, and now they're improvising all along. And what you see is this. You see the two sides. The Russians, it appears to me, had a number of contingency plans. Certainly they wanted to come in. They wanted to do it as bloodlessly as possible. That didn't work. And they've continued to slowly up the ante. But from the Russians' perspective, I think they saw this thing as a part of a larger project. It is diplomatic. It is economic bricks. It is kinetic. And to me, for the Russians, save a nuclear conflict with the West, I think the Ukraine part of it, the kinetic part of it, is the smallest part of the Russians, for the Russians, because the Russians know this is going to be over. No war lasts forever. But they also know that the economic part of it is never going to change. That bottom line is there's no turning back. They can't go back to the West. Even if the West comes to them and begs and says, come back, we want to do business with you, whatever. The Russians know they can never take that chance again. They know that their future lies in the Eurasian coalition. So, wherein the kinetic war is the biggest part for it's the biggest part of the Ukraine conflict now for the US empire and the neocons. I don't think it is for the Russians. I think it's huge, don't get me wrong. They understand the danger of it. That is the landmine they could step on that could blow everything up for everybody. So they understand that this is a situation where they have to step lightly. And I also think that that infuriates a lot of people who support Russia because they want Russia to make a move now to act with, you know, to act now and to end this thing. And I think the Russians are wary to do that because they understand the danger that it could blow up in everybody's face. So I think they're moving slow. And I think they also, as I do, and there are a lot of people that don't agree with me, I think time is on their side. I said this all along. If I were in charge, of Russia, I would be in no rush to end this conflict. Don't get me wrong. It's a terrible thing. People are dying. It's dangerous. All of these things, it's bad news. But humanity still exists. If I were Russians, I'd be concerned that if I ended it too quick, that we could come up with that a scenario could arise wherein a nuclear exchange would happen, a nuclear conflict would happen, and we could all die. So I think the Russians see both sides of it, as do I. And that is, one side is they can end it. They do have the military wherewithal, I believe, to end it if they wanted to. But the other side is, if they put that kind of pressure suddenly on the neocons, would they end up in a nuclear conflict? And that ain't worth it. So right now, I think they're managing. This is the way I would put it. The Russians are managing their relationship with the neocons via the Ukraine war, through the Ukraine conflict, and trying to do everything they can outside of the Ukraine conflict to put the pressure on the neocons. But the project itself, as you know, isn't about Russia. It's about world hegemony. The neocon project itself was simple. We're going to go. Look, it was Russia. Excuse me. It was Ukraine, Taiwan. That was the neocon project itself. It was Ukraine, Taiwan, and the next obvious step would be Kashmir, right? The next obvious step would be Ukraine. India is growing. India is getting more powerful. You've got the equivalent to Taiwan for China and Ukraine for Russia. It's Kashmir for India. So the next move would certainly be we're going to put Russia in its place. We're going to put China in its place, and then India will have no choice, and we'll go. We got to arm Kashmir the Kashmir region, because they need democracy. And then, what do you know? Human rights violations have been found in India, and boom, down the road we go. And I think on some level, India understands those dynamics. That's why they have their issues with China, but I think they're patching things up a little bit. Excuse me. And they're reinforcing their relationship with Russia because they understand that they're next on the menu. So right now, the problem that the neocons have is, I think their biggest problem that they have is the collapse of support in Europe. They miscalculated. They thought that because they could bully the Africans, the Middle Easterns, the Latin Americans, etc., that because they could bully those regions when it came to particularly economic policy, and when military policy came around that those regions didn't like, they could bully them into keeping their mouths shut. And they assumed that when it came to their conflict with Russia, that they could do the same, that they could just call the Africans, the Middle Eastern, the Latin Americans, and say, you have to join us. And at worst case scenario, keep your mouth shut. But I think they felt they'd all join. And they were shocked when they found out that these countries didn't, mainly because these countries had been looking for a way out from under the thumb of the U.S. empire anyway. So they saw this as an opportunity to get out. They saw this as an opportunity that somebody's fighting the U.S. empire. We hate you. We didn't want to tell you that we hated you because we were afraid of you. But now that somebody else is fighting you, we do hate you, and we're looking for ways to get out from under you. And that's one of the big issues, one of the big things that have come out of, to me, the Ukraine project that is disastrous for the neocons. In order to be a world hegemon, you got to keep everybody afraid. You got to have Africa, the Middle East, etc. They have to be concerned that you have so much power that you can crush them at any time. And they don't have those concerns anymore. They've thrown in the towel. They're not afraid of you. Basically, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America are saying to the U.S., we're not afraid of you anymore. If someone else, we're seeing someone will fight you, so we'll all fight you. We'll all stand up against you. You can't get us all at the same time. And so, disastrously for the U.S. empire, how are you going to be the world hegemon if the weakest, think about this, militarily and economically, the weakest, poorest regions of the world, oftentimes as a result of U.S. imperialism, not oftentimes completely because of U.S. imperialism, but the weakest, think about this, you want to rule the world, right? I'm going to be in charge of the world. Everybody's got to listen to me. The weakest regions in the world are no longer afraid of you. The weakest economically and militarily regions of the world have nothing but contempt for you and have no fear in showing the contempt. See, that's the big disaster here for U.S. imperialism. They felt like this. The U.S. imperialists felt like this. We've got to get any rising power must be tamped down so that they can't threaten us, right? They took for granted that the weaker countries were just going to do what they were told. You know, it's like, let me put it to you like this. If somebody were to ask me, how do I get elected? I would say, you got to do two things if you're running for office. Three things. Number one, you got to get out your base. Number two, you got to get out your base. Number three, you got to get out your base. You have to get your base to the polls. The people that support you, whether it's in your party or whatever, you got to get them to the polls. You got to steal some of the other guys. And if there's independents, you got to get the independents. It ain't rocket science as to how you win, right? Maintain your base. You have to have a base of power that you maintain and consolidate every chance you get. And then you go out and get extras, boom, you can win, right? To be an empire, to run the world, what do you have? You have to have a base of hegemony, a base of people who will do what you say. So to the U.S. empire, to rule the world has to start with the weaker countries obeying. You got to have a floor, a foundation. You got to be able to say, Africa's going to do what they're told. Latin America's going to do what they're told. The Caribbean's going to do what they're told. Asia's going to do it. The Middle East, all of these people are going to do what they're told. Got them. They're done. Game over for them. Now, to maintain my hegemony over them, well, that's who I'm stealing all their gold, bananas, coffee, whatever from. That's a given. To maintain that, I got to make sure that none of these other rising countries, there's my threat, there's Iran, there's Venezuela, these are countries that have a lot of oil and gas and things and have a lot of economic and military potential. So I got to make sure that I keep these in their place, but I got to make sure that no country rises that could challenge me. That would be Russia, that would be China, that would be India. That's above the mid-range companies, countries, the Irans, the Venezuelas, things like that. I can keep them down because I'm powerful. My true challenge is going to be Russia. It's going to be China. It's going to be India. It's going to be Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia, I'll put in the other countries. They have achieved their economic power. Venezuela, Iran have the potential to be like Saudi Arabia. But how are you going to be an empire if the floor falls apart, if the foundation of your empire, which is to easily be able to direct what the Africans, the Middle Easterners, and the Latin Americans do, the global South? How are you going to maintain? See, they looked at one side. They said, we've got to keep the Chinas, the Indias, the Africas down because they can rise. They didn't look at the other side. They took that for granted. Let's take it for granted that we got Africa, Latin America, whatever. They're done. We got those. We're the hegemon over all of those. Now we got to make sure these other countries don't rise. And in doing that, it had a paradoxical effect. In working to keep power over Russia and China, to tamp down, to, as they put it, contain Russia and China and India, in working to contain them, they let the other ones loose. In working to contain them, they instigated a conflict between the two biggies. And the two biggies are pushing back, Russia and China, and India to an extent, as best they can. And in doing that, you sent the message. The message was sent to the Africans, the Middle Easterns, etc. Hey, you know what? There's somebody A that has the guts to push back against the U.S. empire, and B, we can now all come together. We can join that entity, and we have hope of taking down the U.S. empire. See, all they needed was hope. The U.S. empire didn't realize that. It pissed them off to the point where all they needed was a little bit of hope. All they needed was somebody to throw a punch back, and they would say, we'll join in and we're going to support you. So now the U.S., initially, the Ukraine project was, we're going to take Russia out and then we move on to China. Now the Ukraine project has turned into, Russia and China are moving into the Middle East diplomatically, economically, and in some instances militarily. Russia and China are moving more and more into Africa, but they're not encroaching on the Africans or encroaching on the Middle Easterners. The Africans and the Middle Easterners are voluntarily asking them to come in, because they want an alternative, because they don't like the rule of the U.S. empire. They don't like the coercion of the U.S. empire. It's not working out best for them. So in creating the Ukraine project to use Ukraine to take out Russia, what they didn't see that doing that and creating that conflict with Russia, they didn't see the dynamic that would create in the global South, which was giving the global South hope to get out from under the boot of the U.S. empire. And now they've got a struggle on their hands, because they have to focus part of their energy on maintaining, keeping Africa and Latin America down. They got to focus a lot of their energy in trying to straighten out their issues in the Middle East, as their proxy there, Israel, falls into disrepair, shall we say. Israel's falling apart. People are in the streets. The Muslim countries around them are getting, restless, and are less inclined to go along with the abuse of the Palestinians. So that whole the Israeli project is in great jeopardy. It is unstable. The other part of it is they created a dynamic in the Ukraine project, created a dynamic in Europe, where it is very obvious that Europe is shifting away from the globalists to, I would say, supporting some form of populist nationalism, right wing, to some extent, national populism and nationalism. So the results of the Ukraine project in Europe are going to be a new political class that doesn't have much of a taste for U.S. imperialism. They may have a taste for their own imperialism, but they don't have a taste for U.S. imperialism, and they don't like it, and they want out. It is to anger the people of Europe. So when this is all said and done, they're not going to have much of an appetite for U.S. imperialism. So bottom line was this: the neocons saw Ukraine, and they only thought about Ukraine and Russia. They only saw that as a conflict that they could manage. They didn't see the reverberations. They didn't see the shock waves coming out. And that's what we're talking about here. The shock waves coming out. That, okay, you're going to do this, but what's going to happen when you end up in a clash with Russia? There's inevitable shock waves. See, they're idiots. They didn't stop to think, do this. Well, we got the Africans or Latin Americans under control, so they're going to support us in this project. But they didn't do this. But what if they don't? What is our contingency plan? Because that ain't what neocons do, right? And intellectuals will say, this is our plan. But what if it doesn't work? What is our backup plan? What if we have this problem? The problem is, if they understood that, they would understand they couldn't undertake they couldn't undertake the Ukraine project, that they'd have to go a different route. But there's no other options for them. There really wasn't. What are their other options if they want to take Russia down other than Ukraine? They can't very well. They don't have the military wherewithal to just go confront Russia. And if they did, they know that even if they won, they'd lose. That if they went to war with Russia, that if by some strange means they were to win that Russia would flatten every one of them. So that wasn't an option because it was just a suicide pill. So now that they started improvising, and that they've improvised the issue in Ukraine has arisen, and that is what are the results when political minds direct military actions, right? When ideologues, State Department people direct military actions. So what they say is, and globalists, so what they say is, we're going to direct this thing in Ukraine. We're going to arm the Ukrainians, and we're going to tell them how to use the arms, when to use the arms, where to use the arms, because we're so smart. We're smarter than the Russians. And the Russians seem to have left this more to their military people to make a decision as to how to act, whereas it is obvious that Blinken and Sullivan and these other people and the Annalena Baerbocks of the world, etc., are much more involved in directing the military actions of the Ukrainians. So what you're starting to see, and this is the big thing to keep, or this is where it all goes to this. The management now for the neocons, right, is managing the conflict between the wants, the needs, the aspirations of the U.S. military, the U.S. neocons, the U.S. empire, and that of the Ukrainian leadership. There is a misalignment here. And that is the undoing of this thing. The undoing of the Ukraine project is, and it had to happen sooner or later, and that is for the neocons to say, we're going to use Ukraine as a blunt object to beat Russia over the head with. Okay, good and fine. And to get some people in Ukraine to put in puppet leadership that is quislings, that are traitors, that are greedy, that are just say, yeah, okay, as long as we're filling our pockets, we want to do this. But there is, in fact, a underlying motivation in Ukraine, and that is you've got a bunch of neo-Nazis, you've got a bunch of nationalists who just want to kill everything Russian. They just hate Russian, and this is the mouse that wants to kill the lion, right? We hate that lion, and I want to kill him. Sorry, bad news, you're a mouse. You ain't killing the lion. You may hate the lion, but you better make peace with the lion, or you better hide from the lion or run from the lion, because if you get in a conflict with the lion, you're going to be a tasty morsel and nothing more. The Ukrainians, pumped up by the neocons, begin to read their own headlines. They believe when the neocons said you can defeat Russia, they started to believe it. You can win, they started to believe it. And so now, and when the neocons said, and we'll help you, they started to believe it. So now the neocons have, I'm not going to say Zelensky because he doesn't exist, the people in Ukraine who are behind Zelensky, who are pushing Zelensky, saying, we've got to do everything we can to win. You're the Americans, you got to be in with us. We know no matter what happens, we got to win this thing. And Americans have been lying to them all along. So now the Americans are running up against the expectations of the Banderites, because they got them there. They got them there. The only way that they could get these people to act as stupid as they are doing, to act as suicidal as they could get them, is empty promises. Yeah, we're there for you. We got you covered. We'll help you to the end. Oh, no, turn that peace deal down. You don't want that peace deal. We're going to arm you to the end, when they were never going to arm them to the end. They felt like the end was going to be early. They felt like the end was going to be Russia's economy collapsing. And when it didn't, now it's improvisation. And they can't just say to the neo-Nazis that they have running Ukraine, the extremists running Ukraine, they can't just say, we don't have a plan. They can't just say, look, guys, we were planning on taking the Russians out. And when that didn't happen, we really don't know what to do. We really don't have a plan. So all we're going to do is keep feeding your people into the meat grinder. They can't come out and say that. It's obvious to anybody that's watching it, but they can't come out and admit that truth to the to their own people, number one. to the world, to the Europeans, and of course to the Ukrainians. So now, if you're watching this conflict, as I've said many a times, it's over. It is over because the Ukrainians, sure, can they attack and kill some Russians? Yes, they can. Can they do these pinprick attacks on the Crimean Bridge or blow up a apartment building somewhere, or a drone falls in Vladivostok and things like that? Sure, they can do things like that. They can send some drones, some helicopter quad drones, some whatever, right? A torpedo style drone attack on the bridge or on something, a Navy base. They can do those kinds of things. But those kinds of things are an aggravation, but they're not going to change the outcome, the course of this thing. And there's no way to manage it at this point. And the Russians know it. And the Russians just keep warning them, don't go too far or this thing's going to get ugly. And it can get ugly. And let's just hope it doesn't. I don't think that's going to happen myself. I don't think Biden sending 3,000 troops, and people are like, well, and this is part of it, the collapse of it. This is done to me, in my perspective, from public relations, for this reason. People are like, well, is he sending them there to fight? 3,000 call up reserves is not the size force that you need to go against the Russian military on Russia's border. It's just not realistic to think that you can bring up these 3,000 people and that's part of a force, part of a force. In fact, it shows to me the fact that they had to call them up, that they couldn't just say, hey, send 30,000 soldiers from here to there, because they've got conflict in so many places that they're trying to manage. Things are going bad in so many places. They didn't have any soldiers, so they said, call up some people, send 3,000. Now, the question was me I saw Mercoris and the Duran, and they said, basically, is this a tripwire? And here would be my question if I answered that. Tripwire for what? A tripwire implies that, okay, we're going to put 3,000 troops here, and if you attack those troops, then we'll go after you, right? Well, yeah, that's in theory. If those troops get attacked, if they get killed, if they get blown up, we'll put them in Ukraine. If you attack them, then the big contingent comes in and takes you out, right? Here's the problem. Tripwire for what? There's no big contingent to back them up. So what are you going to say? Here's 3,000 troops, and we're going to put them here. And if you hurt those 3,000 troops, you're really going to get it. Okay, let's say I blast those 3,000 troops to hell. Then what are you going to do? See, we don't have 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 troops to back them up. If it was a tripwire, then that would imply that if those troops got attacked, then X happens. Oh, then we send in the big boys, man. We're going to send in 150, 200. Well, we don't have those troops. So if that tripwire was tripped, there would be nothing to follow it up. So to me, no, I don't see it as a tripwire. I see it as a public relations operation to give the illusion. Maybe, I guess to the Russians, I guess they feel that the Russians can't count. But I think it's to give the illusion, maybe to the Russians, maybe to the American people, maybe to the Europeans. Maybe as European support collapses, they want to give the illusion that they're doing more to protect Europe or whatever the hell, and they're going to send 3,000 troops. It's not a huge contingent of troops. I mean, Bakhmut attacked Ukraine attacked Bakhmut with like 60 or 100,000 troops. 3,000 troops ain't that you couldn't attack a small town in Ukraine with 3,000 troops. Not even a small village, a small farming village, 3,000 troops to get blown to hell. So that doesn't make me think that the U.S. is about to get into it or they're creating a tripwire. It does lead me to believe that they know that there are a lot of entities looking at this now saying, I'm not comfortable with the direction this is going, and they've got to pretend that they're strong and blah, 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 blah. But here's 3,000 troops. That's what I think that is. But the what do you call it? The project now, which of course it already it was inextricably linked to the Taiwan project, because these are the two big growing superpowers, and we got to take them both out. So clearly Ukraine, that's the Russian plan. Taiwan, that's the Chinese plan. But what it did, since they can both obviously see what's happening, is they were going to deal with them separately. And they did this with the illusion in their mind, with the belief that Russia and China won't get along. They don't like each other. They got problems against each other, blah, blah, blah. In reality, they united Russia and China. So the um, uh, uh, um, disintegration, collapse, catastrophic collapse of the um, Ukraine project, for the most part, is outside of Ukraine. The disastrous collapse of the Ukraine project is in Africa, where the Africans are like, screw you, Yankee, go home, French, get out. We're had enough. Hooray, we've got other options. We're going to deal with Russia and China, not you. It's in the Middle East now, where China was able to go in and broker a peace deal and to tamp down on U.S. chaos in the region, which is going to put great pressure on the U.S. in the Middle East, and it's going to make it more and more difficult for them to keep their troops in Syria. It's in Europe, where the Europeans now are dealing with their restive populations, where they're an economy that's in deep trouble with an upcoming winter, where they don't know how they're going to heat their homes and run their factories. And of course, Russia, if I'm not mistaken, Russia and China are doing, I don't see it here. Russia and China are doing a I think it's in the Sea of Japan. They're doing a naval exercise right now. So Russia and China are doing more and more military exercises together. So part of course, the Ukraine project is to make sure that no entities grow that could challenge you. The Ukraine project and the Taiwan project has created a new entity. And this is the Russia-China octopus, this 8-armed octopus. The Putin G, Russia, China, whatever you want to call it, it's created a new economic and I would say / military entity that is, if you don't want China to grow, you don't want Russia to grow, you don't want the two of them to grow. So your actions now have brought them together, and you've created this gigantic economic, commodity, diplomatic, military alliance that's far more powerful than you. And might I add, that has a historical context that is viewed by the global South. That throughout the global South, they have suffered at U.S. and European colonial imperialism, and Russia and China have too. So the global South sees them as brethren, and of course, China being a socialist country, you've got a lot of socialist countries throughout the world who are seeing opportunity. They want to live that. They want socialism. That's what they want. And me, I believe this: countries should have what the hell they want. If the Hungarians want a conservative government and they want Viktor Orban, they should have Viktor Orban in a conservative government. It's their damn country. And if the Nicaraguans and the Venezuelans want Maduro and a social and Ortega and a socialist government, it's their damn country, and they should have what they want. And for those who say socialism doesn't work, conservatism doesn't work, capitalism doesn't work, let these countries do their thing, and we'll all find out. Who knows? It might work for them. It might not work for them. It might work for a while. It might not work for a while. Let's face it, our system of government and our system of economy ain't doing so well right now. So we are in no position to tell other countries that they have to model their economic and cultural system after the one that we have that's collapsing. So right now, what we're looking at is the U.S. empire trying to figure out how they can put fires out in Ukraine and just hold this thing together as long as they can. I think any hopes of winning are gone. They're over. Ain't no hope that of somehow taking Russia out. Now it's, how do I scrape together something enough to get out of here with my hide intact, and to I think from the neocons, it's how do we smoothly transition to our next phase, which may be going after China. How do we smoothly transition out to from an obvious loss to a rhetorical win? Because that's all they're trying to get now, a rhetorical win. I think it's obvious where they are, that this thing is falling apart. And all you had to do was look at the NATO meeting where they were coming together. And I think there was great concern going in, for obvious reasons, going into the NATO meeting. Because if you think about the NATO meeting, and what I'm talking about now, right? The NATO meeting was a time where the um, leadership of the U.S. empire had to meet with its vassals, and they had to contemplate an obvious loss to the Russians. They had to contemplate how they were going to deal with the fact that they decided to take on the Russians and they lost. They decided to take on that excuse me, that their plan for maintaining hegemony right now, the only plan they had, the plan that they've been pushing for years, this whole Ukraine plan, they've been pushing since at least, I mean, far before 2014, but it went into high gear in 2014. They put so much time, so much effort, so much money into this thing, and it ain't working. And it's obvious it doesn't work. And it's tied to Victoria Nuland. It's tied to Biden. It's tied to certain people because it was their plan. It's obvious this was Biden was part of this thing. The Bidens, the Nulands, the Sullivans were part of this, and it is theirs, and it's sitting in their lap, and it is collapsing, and they don't know what to do. I think they understand probably from the Pentagon, they can't fight the Russians right about this. They can't fight the Russians and the Chinese all at once. And they've dug themselves into that hole where their option would be to go in and fight the Russians and the Chinese. We know, look, let's face it, the Chinese cannot let the Russians lose. Not that the Russians are going to lose, but the Chinese have just as much at stake in here as the Russians. The U.S. has made it obvious because they have upped their attacks on the Chinese at the same time that they've launched this massive war against the Russians. And let me just check something real quick. And when they went to Vilnius, the meltdown was obvious to the world. And where it was the picture where they were all together. They were all still, skinning and grinning and where their project, the representation, the personification of the Ukraine project. Let's be honest. The personification of the Ukraine project is Vladimir Zelensky. He is the Ukraine project in its human form. He does what he's told. He tells any lie that he's told to tell. He pushes the hatred for Russia. He represents the Azov battalion and the Nazi militants without admitting that he represents them. He represents the neocon cabal in Washington without saying he represents them. I mean, he's the perfect actor. He's the perfect hollow mask. He says, I'm the president of Ukraine and I'm standing up for Ukraine, and he ain't. That's the last thing he's standing up for is the country of Ukraine. So here's the personification of the Ukraine project. And when you look at the picture, you see that he was ostracized. You see that you know what it looked like to me? They didn't want to face their failure, that their failure was standing in the room with them, that they could look at their failure. He was there right in some kind of a green, stupid looking uniform with beat up work boots on. I mean, a wrinkly green uniform that didn't fit and work boots. And he was amongst the ruling elite of the United States empire. And they ostracized him and pushed him aside because they didn't want to look at their failure. They looked at him. And the other thing that was obvious was this. He knows it. And they're going to throw him under the bus. They're going to blame him for everything they can. They're looking for scapegoats right now. It's not their fault. It's the fault of Zelensky. It's the fault of whoever. And of course, since there's no honor amongst thieves, the Zelensky's and Zelenskys of the world started off with, hey, man, the reason that things aren't working out well for us is that the West isn't giving us enough fast enough. So they got a problem. And that is, how are they going to hide from their people that their plan is in catastrophic meltdown when the guy who they've pumped up as some brilliant and gallant leader is saying, it's their fault. They won't give me what I need. And they don't have the things to give them. Meltdown. He doesn't have the people that he needs. They're getting killed. You don't have the stuff that you need to give him. That's getting blown up and you're running out. And your support is waning. Everything's going bad for the neocon project. And remember, the neocon project is about world hegemony, which means it doesn't mean you're losing world hegemony. It means you've already lost it. You have an entity far more powerful than the U.S. empire. If you put the military See, here's the thing about it. If you put the military of Russia and China together, you've got a very powerful military, but there's something that's even more powerful. See, there's something that exponentially increases the power of the Russian military and increases the power of the Chinese military, and that's this. They're defending their homeland. And that is, the US empire has to go to them and assault them, has to go to their border to attack them. The US empire, in order to go to China, has to go through Taiwan or whatever machination they're using to go after China. To go after Russia, they have to go through up to Russia's border, through Ukraine, and I'm saying, when I say through, I don't mean physically walk through Ukraine, I mean utilizing Ukraine. And in doing that, what is obvious by doing that is that they got to go to the border of these countries, where these countries are strongest in defending their border. So if they're going to have any military action against Russia and China, and as you probably know, have heard many times, if you study anything about military, if an assault force is attacking an entrenched, dug-in fort, you're assaulting a city, the enemy has the city, generally you need a 3-to-1 advantage. So if you're going to go attack Russia on Russia's border, if you're going to attack China on China's border, you need a 3-to-1 advantage. There ain't no way you can have a 3-to-1 advantage because of, number one, we don't have a military that big to go after both of them when you look at the numbers in population. And because it's so far away that nobody would have the ability to maintain supply lines at that distance when both of those countries have submarine forces and have long-range missile forces. So we can't engage them both of them on their border at the same time. We really can't engage either one of them on their border. So the Ukraine project would require for us to be able to engage Russia, but it would have to be separate from China, and it ain't. And now, what do? There's something even worse going on, and that's domestic politics, in that people are waking up and they're starting to say, I have questions about whether it's Joe Biden and his actions in Ukraine, whether it's censorship, it is the things going on by the intelligence agencies, by the FBI, to try to tamp down dissent, to try to keep people from finding out the truth. Their hands are so dirty that they can't let people find that out. The Ukraine project is so brittle and on the verge of collapse that they can't let people find out what's going on. So they've got this huge censorship regime going on. That's under assault. That the courts, people are in the courts now fighting against the censorship machine. People are in the Congress doing some fighting, it ain't but so much, but some fighting against the censorship machine. So the Russians they're fighting with the Russians. They're fighting with the Chinese. They got instability. The global South is done. Hates the U.S. Finished with them. The Middle East is going along with Russia when it comes to OPEC, things of that nature. And at home, they're fighting a battle against dissent. They're fighting a battle against alternative media. They're fighting everyone in every direction. You just can't win that war. I see no win for the U.S. empire. This thing is in a meltdown. And so what do they do now? Because they got another big lump on their back. You know what that is? 2020 election. So now that it's election season, you got RFK Jr., you got Cornel West, to some extent, even Trump starting to talk this thing up, saying, hey, what are they doing here? Their foreign policy is screwed up. It's too dangerous. It's going to get us all killed. We need to go in another direction. And they know that's a problem. So now, not only do they have to tamp down dissent, not only do they have to have a war on alternative media, now they got to stop RFK Jr., Cornel West, and Trump from saying things that are going to hurt them. And they're within those three names. I'm sure there's somebody you don't like. There's somebody you do like. That's fine. But my point being, all of them are pushing back against the U.S. empire. Trump, I guess, who knows why? I don't care. I think Trump's inclination is to be an imperialist, but he wants to go after small countries that are easy to rob, like Venezuela. He don't want to go after the big ones. He don't want to go after somebody that will bloody the U.S.'s nose. So he's still problematic, but he's not down with the Ukraine project, as it were. He's more ideological, going after left-wing or socialism first and foremost, as an ideological crusade. But you've got RFK Jr. and Cornel West, who are, I mean, look, they're saying some things you may not like here and there. Cornel West will say Putin's a gangster. I think that's a mistake. RFK Jr. every now and then will say, well, I mean, um, Ukraine has their sovereignty to be protected. Well, the U.S. overthrew the government. U.S. installed the puppet government. There is no sovereignty in Ukraine, so that is out the window. That's something that there's no point talking about independence, territorial independence, or sovereignty in Ukraine. So my point is, yes, RFK Jr. misses the mark in some areas. Yes, um, um, Cornel West misses the mark in some areas. Yes, Trump misses the mark in some areas, but collectively, they are helping to foster a discussion that desperately needs to be had. And just having that discussion makes it very difficult for the neocons to continue what they're doing, to continue their fight. So this thing is falling apart, and I do believe, I may be wrong, I do believe that the Biden team right now is pretending to be friends with China, because I think, number one, they see China and Russia getting closer, and they're concerned with that. Excuse me. I also think that there's some powerful billionaires who are saying, hey, man, you're screwing up my money when it comes to China. And I also think they feel like we got to deal with Russia first and then get to China. And going into the election season, they're wary of an economic collapse, that wherein China could help them out, but it won't. Whereas China could buy T-bills, but it won't. So they got a lot of reasons, personal reasons, to try to make amends with China. But of course, it's all a fraud, because as they send Yellen or whoever the hell over to shake hands and to say, hey, we want to be friends with China, they're still building missile bases. They're still expanding their military. They're still building up for military engagement with China. So China's not stupid. They're like, come on, get out of here with that, you. We're going to continue doing what we're doing with Russia, and we're going to continue preparing in case we got to fight you, and we'll fight you with Russia. And so I think the bottom line is, coming out of Vilnius, let me finish up with this, coming out of NATO meeting, people looked at it and they wondered what they were going to see. And they expected the neocons to go in and say, look, we're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. This is our guy. Vladimir Zelensky's our guy. We're going to give him everything he needs. We're going to keep going. And, excuse me, in a way, very lightly, excuse me for yawning, I was up late last night and just got up and kind of busy, but very lightly, they kind of implied that. But the body language was unmistakable. The body language was unmistakable. You can't cheat your body language. Body language never lies. And the body language was, we're all in a group and he ain't. We're all together and he ain't. And when it comes down to it, we're going to look out for our needs and not his. And I think the people in Ukraine know that. And of course, as I've said, we're getting to a point where I don't know how much longer Zelensky's going to be with us on this earthly plane. And I think the look on his face showed that he knew that his life is in great danger. He knows that this project is in great danger, and that at some point, if he's smart, he understands that they're going to walk on him. They're going to walk away from this. At some point, there'll be a fight internally, but I think they're going to have to do it at some point. Let me look real quick for the super chats. And see if we got any. All right. Let's start. Salty Texas trucker. They're making money before the SMO, during SMO, and already making plans for after with BlackRock during Reconstruction. You are correct, but there's some problems in that. There's some holes in their swing there. Russia ain't Russian. Let's see. Thank you very much, Winston Fahrenheit. How about we go now to Rafael Lagonde? Gee, do you know how accurate you were about Erdogan? Biden told him already he's not too sure about the F-16s. You were so right. Yeah, I made a point. That's the point I made. No honor amongst thieves. And that's, hey, Erdogan made a deal with the neocons. You can't trust the neocons. You only what you can get. You know, my money in hand deals. Let's make a deal. How much money can you put in my hand right now? Because anything that you tell me I'm getting in the future, I ain't betting on that. And when Erdogan made a deal with the neocons, my point was, you can't trust the neocons. They're going to backstab you, Erdogan. But the great thing about it is that the neocons can't trust Erdogan because he's going to backstab them. So you got a bunch of backstabbers who can never be trusted in deals, who are always looking for leverage. That's where we went. I saw that coming a mile ago away. Thanks a lot, Raphael. That thing's falling apart, but it was never a real deal. It was people posturing, and it was the U.S. empire trying to posture prior to the NATO summit. All right. Rafik Adams, will Russia invade West or stop at the river? What will end the war? Excuse me. At this point, I think Russia does not want, here's the bottom line. Russia doesn't want any parts of Western Ukraine. They understand how toxic it is. They understand what it is. But what the Russians will not allow, great question, Rafik Adams. What they will not allow is for Ukraine to continue to be used as the blunt object. When they're done, they're done. The Russians have said, we're not going to do this every 5 to 10 years. We're not going to say, okay, we're going to, turn this thing into a stop here, and then 5 to 10 years from now, we'll be back fighting this war again. Nah, the Russians ain't doing that. So I think they will, and add this. When the Russians get to the Dnieper, let's say they get to the Dnieper, they get there, right? At that point, Ukraine will not be in a position to defend themselves anyway. At that point, the Ukrainian military will be so badly battered, the Ukrainian military and political system will be in collapse. So at that point, the Russians will be able to go as far as they choose. So will they go into Western Ukraine militarily? If they need to do that to pursue Ukrainian military targets, they will. But as far as just going over there to take Western Ukraine and to dominate it and to manage and run it, the Russians don't want that. It's of no value. They got all of the best part of Ukraine anyway. They're going to have where a lot of the wheat's grown. They're going to have basically the mines. They're going to have the coasts where the port cities are. So the bottom line is they don't need Western Ukraine. It's a pain in the neck. They'll flatten it out if they need to a bit to keep Ukrainian. But the bottom line is this. They will see Western Ukraine as purely a military objective. And they're not going to allow the West to say, okay, this is all of Ukraine now, let's rearm it. They ain't going to do that. So we'll see what happens. But that's a great question. I think that's this. Let's look on Rockfin. Eleanor Johnson, Garland Nixon. Oh, okay. Thanks a lot. Garland, can you lay out a prosecutor's case against this crime against Ukraine and humanity? I don't think I have to. I think it's kind of obvious, isn't it? It is obvious that the United States overthrew the government of Ukraine. That's against the law. It's obvious that the U.S. pillaged and robbed the government of Ukraine. That's against the law. They were involved in the planning of terrorist actions against Russian civilian targets. That's against them. You could go on and on and on. So it's not hard. But thanks a lot, Stephen George. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I got to get ready to run. It is a Monday morning, and I got lots to do to get ready for the week. Thanks a lot, you all. Have a great day. Don't forget, if you can afford it, you got patreon.com. Certainly buy me a coffee. That's an easy one. All you got to do is, it says buy Garland a coffee for $5. How many do you want to buy? It's simple. And of course, you can do just like Patreon, and you can say, I want to do a subscription and I want to do monthly. So if you can do buy me a coffee, if you can do Patreon, also PayPal, and my Cash App is information up there. Anybody that wants to support the channel and can afford it is highly appreciated. Additionally, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Go there, become a member. Doesn't cost a penny. If you can afford to support the channel, $14.99 a month to support the channel. If you can afford to support the channel, please do that. And you can sign up for a year, and it costs like 12 something a month because they knock off a couple of months. All right. Oh, Rafik has another one. So before we go, so if you can go to Rockfin, nothing to join, please join in case they throw me off of YouTube. And if they don't, and additionally, it is a free speech platform. So there's lots of good stuff on Rockfin. Let's see what Rafik Adams says. Any updates on Dr. E. Michael Jones's invited guest to discuss the Ukraine war? Not yet. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm out. And don't forget, share this on all your